purnamudachyate purnasya purnamadaya purnameva vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Before we begin our class, I have a sad announcement to share with you. One of our students has passed away. Some of you might remember sitting in this front row. His name was Lakshman Phadke. He was about my height, little stocky, in his 60s, and suddenly passed away just a couple of days ago. And he's been a long-time student here. He spends quite a bit of time in India, so you may not see him so frequently here. But it's very sad, and I'm sure a difficult time for the family. So with that in mind, we'll recite for his Atma Shanti, we'll recite Triambaka mantra 3 times, and then a brief moment of silence at the end. First time, listen and repeat. The second and third time, so chant together. Om Triambakam Yajamahe, Om Triambakam Yajamahe, Sugandham Pushtivardhanam, Sugandham Pushtivardhanam, Urvarukamiva Bandhanan, Urvarukamiva Bandhanan, Mrityor Mukshya Mamratahata, Mrityor Mukshya Mamratahata. Together. Om Triambakam Yajamahe, Sugandham Pushtivardhanam, Urvarukamiva Bandhanan, Mrityor Mukshya Mamratahata. Om Triambakam Yajamahe, Sugandham Pushtivardhanam, Urvarukamiva Bandhanan, Mrityor Mukshya Mamratahata. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parameshwara. Very good. We'll continue with our class. We've got a roadmap up on the board, and part of the roadmap is yet to be filled in. We'll see how far we go today. We're in a section of the text that we introduced at the end of the last class. It is very shocking, at least if you understand the context, it's very shocking. In the Shukla Yajurveda Samhita, where all of the hymns are being given for the performance of rituals, at the very end of that section of the Veda comes this Upanishad. And in this Upanishad are a series of verses highly critical of rituals and certain forms of meditation which are for the sake of gaining special powers. And of course, what's most surprising is the Veda itself criticizing the performance of rituals. That's what marks the unique nature of the Upanishads. The Upanishads are a portion of the Veda that reject Vedic ritualism completely and focus instead on spiritual wisdom. And the basis, of course, we've discussed this from the beginning of the text, but just to put it in slightly different words, the goal we seek, the goal of discovering one's true nature to be non-separate from Brahman, the reality of all, that goal could be described as an infinite goal, just to use some loose language, as a boundaryless goal, as a vast goal, as an infinite goal. The amount of effort you put into any achievement should be proportional to the goal. For a small goal, you should require a small effort. For a medium-sized goal, medium effort. And for an infinite goal, you will never reach it through karma, and karma in a sense of Vedic rituals. No matter how pious you are, no matter how many rituals you do, no matter how many priests you hire, and how much ghee you pour into that fire, 1,000 priests won't be enough. 1,000 gallons of ghee won't be enough, which is why the Upanishads utterly reject the ritualism of the Vedas. And that criticism we saw, we'll pick up the thread. We finished the 9th verse. Let's just return to the 9th verse to get the context, and then we'll proceed with the next series of verses. So here, in the 9th verse, I mentioned I mentioned that we have the new slides prepared that include the Vedic swaras and that include my own translation as opposed to the translation that we had before. We put it up on the website. There was some problem with the file. It was taken down. It's being repaired. It'll get put back up. We're working on it. So maybe in a day, maybe tomorrow or the day after, you can go back to that website and you can find the new slides, which are the ones that we're using here. Many of you printed out the slides at the beginning of the class that do not have the Vedic swaras and have a very different translation. So that file will be available. If you have any problems with these PowerPoint, and we've been dealing with a few small problems. If you have a problem, you can try to refresh the page. You can try to download it and then open it. But if you continue to have problems, let us know, and then we'll work on it. Okay. So we saw at the end of the prior class, the 9th verse. Andham tamaha pravishanti ye. Those people go to blinding darkness. Who? Avidyam upasate. Those who resort to avidya. And yes, we know that avidya means ignorance, but it's used metaphorically here. Avidya represents Vedic rituals. So those who are committed to the performance of Vedic rituals, they remain in darkness. Not just ordinary darkness, andha tamaha, darkness, deep darkness, blinding darkness. And if that's not bad enough, tato bhuyaha eva te tamaha ye. That ya is actually ye. There are others who go to bhuyaha eva tamas, even darker darkness. Who are those who go to even darker darkness? Those who are rataha, who are committed to or who revel in vidyayam, who revel in vidya. Vidya means knowledge, but again, in this context, vidya means devata upasana, meditation on the gods. And that's gods with a lowercase g, which means gods like Vayu and Varuna, gods of nature, Agni. So invoking God in the form of the powers of nature. So this was considered even more lowly, leading you into more darkness, because it's, I think at the very end of the last class, we made a little connection to the tantrika systems that evolved much, much later. This Veda is about 3,000 years old, what we're studying. At that point, there was no such thing as tantra. The tantrika systems came much later, and as I mentioned, tantra has a lot of nasty connotations in modern times, but the traditional way of understanding it, the scriptural way of understanding it, is using ritual and mantra to manipulate the world. It was almost like quasi-scientific. You try to affect the world around you by using these rituals. and mantras, etc. So the second one, vidya, is a reference to that. So those who practice these meditations on the gods, trying to gain command over the world to some extent, they end up in even darker darkness. So these verses are highly critical. Now, this is the first of 3 verses criticizing vidya and avidya in this context, criticizing Vedic rituals and meditation on the gods. So we're going to see this group of 3, verses 9, 10, and 11. And then as time allows, we're going to see a parallel group of 3 verses, 12, 13, 14, which follow exactly the same pattern. We'll see when we get there, see how far we get in this class. So, of this set of 3, we finished verse 9, and the next is verse 10. Repeat after me. Anyadevahuravidyaya Anyadevahurvidyaya Anyadahuravidyaya Anyadahuravidyaya Iti shushumadhirahana Iti shushumadhirahana Yenastadvichachakshire Yenastadvichachakshire. Just to be chanting these verses with Vedic swaras really makes you think about what we're studying. Is right out of the Samhita, right out of the Vedic ritual section of the Yajurveda. So here, talking about those 2, vidya, representing Vedic rituals, and avidya, representing meditation on the gods. It says, this verse says, Anyat eva ahuhu. Ahuhu, they say. Anyat eva, it's different. What is different? Vidyaya. That which you can gain through vidya, that which you can gain through Vedic rituals, is anyat, is one thing. And anyat ahuhu, and they say it's different than again, avidyaya, than what you can gain through avidya, through meditation on the gods. It's saying that these are 2 different sadhanas, 2 different practices, which have different results. And these verses, by the way, are a little obscure. And without a good commentary, it's very hard to make sense out of them. Continue to reference Sri Shankaracharya's commentary. So he makes it very clear. Sri Shankara says, karmana, what do you get out of this avidya, Vedic rituals? We said Vedic rituals meant karma, Vaidika karma, Vedic rituals. What do you get karmana? What do you get out of Vedic rituals? You get pitraloka. You get to go to the world of the ancestors. One of the many heavens where the ancestors go. So through Vedic rituals, you reach the land of the ancestors. Vidyaya, and through these meditations on the gods, you get Devaloka. Devaloka is a realm of the gods, where the gods are. Ancestors are in Pitraloka, that's what you get through Vedic rituals. And the gods are in Devaloka, that's what you get through meditation on the gods. And that's pretty much what's said in the second line here. Iti shushruma, thus we have heard. Dhiranam, from the wise ones. The wise ones have told us, and of course this is what we're seeing in the Vedas, the wise ones. I find it amusing that in the Vedas they'll make reference, this is a Vedic rishi, making reference, remember this whole Upanishad is the Vakya, the statements of one of the ancient rishis. And this ancient rishi here is saying, we heard this long ago from the wise ones who came before us. This is a 3,000-year-old scripture making reference to those who came long before. That is just the antiquity of these scriptures is mind-boggling sometimes. So, iti shushruma, thus we have heard, dhiranam, from the wise ones who came before, yea, those, naha, to us, Tad vichachakshire, those who taught this. Vichachakshire, those who taught all of this. Naha, to us. So those ancient ones taught to us. What did they taught? There's one result for Vedic rituals. You get to Pitraloka, the land, the heaven in which all the forefathers, ancestors dwell. And through the meditation on the gods, here called Vidya, you reach the Devaloka, the realm of the gods. And the Sanskrit is a little obscure, but with the help of the commentary, we can make sense. Then that brings us to the last of the three verses, talking about Vidya and Avidya. Vidyam cha, vidyam cha, vidyam cha, vidyam. Yas tad vedo, Yas tad vedo bhayagasaha. Yas tad vedo bhayagasaha. Avidyaya mrityum tirtva. Avidyaya mrityum tirtva. Vidyaya mritamashnute. Vidyaya mritamashnute. It's expanding on the prior verse. Avidyam cha, actually not expanding, making a further point. The prior verse says you get one result from Vedic rituals, you get another result from meditation on the gods. Now, some intelligent person is thinking, what result do you get if you do both? Right? So if you get one result through Vedic rituals, you get another result through meditation on the gods, definitely somebody's going to think, wait a minute, I can do both. What will be the result of doing both? And that's what's addressed in this verse. Vidyam cha, avidyam cha, both of them. Remember, vidya here means meditation on the gods. Avidya here means Vedic rituals. Yaha, one who, tad veda ubhayam. Ubhayam saha, together. Ubhayam, both of them. Saha, together. Yaha, one who, tad veda, understands them. One who understands both of them, not just understand and practice. So one who practices both of them together, Vedic rituals and meditation on the gods, what results does that person gain? Avidyaya, through the Vedic rituals, through avidya, means through Vedic rituals, mrityum tirtva, one crosses death. Through Vedic rituals, one crosses death. And vidyaya, through vidya, meaning through meditation on the gods, amritam ashnute, one gains immortality. Now these words, mrityu and amritam, literally death and immortality, they need to be understood clearly. This is, as we've observed several times, mystical poetry. And mystical poetry needs to be reflected upon and interpreted properly. And if I reflect on these verses, I'm afraid I could get really confused unless I refer to a commentary. They're obscure. This is already 3,000 years old. That's enough to make it obscure. And then look at the content, the subject matter. It just makes it doubly obscure. So let me just share with you a little bit of how Sri Shankara explains this. Vidyaya, through Vedic karma, like what? Agnihotra, like Agnihotra, which was the ritual that was done twice daily in every pious household, morning and evening. Through these Vedic rituals, mrityum, and now what does he mean by mrityu? And here's Shankaracharya's explanation of mrityu, of death. It says, through Vedic rituals you cross death. But does it really mean physical death you're crossing? This is how Shankara explains it. He says, mrityum swabhavikam karma, worldly karma, worldly activities, jnanam cha, and worldly knowledge. Mrityu represents worldly activities and worldly knowledge. He says these, Mrityu Shabda Vachyam Ubhayam. Both of these, both worldly actions and worldly knowledge, both of these are represented by the word Mrityu. Now, sometimes these explanations may not seem intuitive. I don't think this sounds particularly intuitive, to say that death in this verse represents worldly action and worldly knowledge. It may not sound intuitive to you and me because we're analyzing this text with very modern minds. Here we have an opportunity to draw upon the wisdom of Sri Shankaracharya, who lived 1200 years ago. Now, he didn't live at the same time as the ancient rishis, but he lived long enough ago and was closely enough connected to the tradition that I think we should trust his judgment over ours. And I got very frustrated when I started studying all of this, because I wanted it all to make sense to my modern mind. And sometimes it's not going to make sense to a modern mind, because the ancient rishis thought very differently than we did. And we have to learn to set aside our modern worldview so that we can appreciate better the ancient worldview. So according to Sri Shankara, those who practice Vedic rituals cross death means what? They transcend worldly activities and worldly knowledge. That's how Shankara explains it. And Vidyaya, through meditation on the gods, and just to make sure we remember, he says, Devata Jnanena. He says, through knowledge of the gods, it means through meditation on the gods. What do you get? The verse said, Amritam, immortality. And Sri Shankara explains Amritam, immortality, as Devata Atma Bhavam, as achieving the same condition, Atma Bhavam, as the gods. To achieve the same condition as the gods means to become like the gods, to dwell with the gods in Devaloka. Now, this is how Shankara explains it. And again, if it may not seem intuitive to our modern minds, that's a challenge for us to see. But one thing we can understand is, if you're doing these rituals and meditations, and if they're taking you to Pitraloka, the realm of the ancestors, the heaven of the ancestors, or Devaloka, the heaven of the gods, the place where the gods dwell, if you become like the gods, remember that in the context of Advaita Vedanta, this is considered a very limited form of success. Going to heaven in Advaita Vedanta is considered, in fact, it's considered that you blew it. If you go to heaven, you blew it. If you go to hell, you really blew it. If you're reborn as a cockroach, you really blew it. But if you go to heaven, you have failed to reach the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is remaining non-separate from Brahman, the truth of all. Going to heaven is a goal that's criticized by Advaita Vedanta because of its limitation. What is the limitation of going to heaven? Most of you know very well. You go to Swarga, is a word. You go to Swarga based on your accumulation of good karmas, but your accumulation of good karmas are finite in number. So, do you stay in heaven for infinite time or for finite time? If heaven is a result of finite good karmas, your time in heaven comes to an end and you get reborn again into some other situation. This is utterly unlike the biblical concept of heaven. The biblical concept of heaven is actually completely illogical. The biblical concept of heaven is that based on your finite bad deeds, you can suffer for infinite time in hell. Illogical. according to the Bible, due to your finite good deeds, you go to heaven for infinite time, timeless. It doesn't, it's a belief, I understand, but if you're going to believe in anything, you should believe in something rational. You should not believe in something irrational. Doctrine of karma is rational. Doctrine of reincarnation is rational. Doctrine of eternal heaven and hell is just irrational. If you're going to believe in it, by the way, if you don't want to believe in anything, I'm fine with that. If you want to reject eternal heaven and hell, and you want to reject the Hindu concept of heaven and hell, you say, Swamiji, they're just beliefs, right? Yeah. So do I have to believe them? No. Can you gain moksha without believing in heaven and hell? Yes. These are all beliefs. But the point I'm making, if you're going to believe in anything whatsoever, if you don't want to believe in anything, I respect that. But if you're going to believe in something, at least let it be a belief in something reasonable and rational. Let it not be a belief that's unreasonable or unrational. Okay. So here, going to heaven is criticized. Going to heaven is a result then. This verse, to paraphrase the whole verse, by combining Vedic rituals with meditation on the gods, you can go to one of the various heavens that are described in Vedic scriptures, in Hindu scriptures. And it's criticized here because if you go to heaven, you've missed the highest goal. If you go to heaven, it's a temporary time of enjoyment, but if you go to the highest goal, which is becoming non-separate from Brahman, that is an eternal condition. That never comes to an end, and that's a big topic which we'll perhaps discuss in another context. Okay, we have now seen this series or sequence of 3 verses, 9, 10, and 11, criticizing the performance of Vedic rituals, called Vidya, and criticizing meditation on the gods, called Vidya. We're now going to see a parallel set of 3 verses. Parallel because they follow the same pattern, exactly the same pattern as 9, 10, and 11. We're going to see exactly the same pattern in 12, 13, and 14. The difference being, instead of criticizing avidya and vidya, it's going to criticize asambhuti and sambhuti. Now, we're going to find out, we'll start with the next verse, and we'll find out what is sambhuti, what is asambhuti. We'll define these terms as we go along. These are perhaps unfamiliar terms. So let us proceed. So verse 12 will look very much like verse 9. Verse 9 was our introduction, talking about going into antatamas, going into darkness, and others going into bhuya eva tamas, going into even darker darkness. Does it look familiar? It should. It follows the pattern exactly. Let's see verse 12. Antam tama pravishanti, antam tama pravishanti, ye sambhutemupasate, ye sambhutemupasate, tato bhuya hivate tama, tato bhuya hivate tamo, ya usambhuhu tyagam vrataha, ya usambhuhu tyagam vrataha. Andham tamaha pravishanti ye. Those people enter blinding darkness, exactly as it said in verse 9. Who? Ye, those who asambhutam upasate. Those who worship or those who resort to asambhuti. Now, asambhuti and sambhuti, these are terms used in Vedic times, and they have to be, once again, properly interpreted. Asambhuti literally means that which has not come into existence, if you want a literal meaning, just as vidya literally means knowledge, but comes to mean Vedic rituals in this context. Here, asambhuti literally means that which does not come into existence, but now it's used as a metaphor. It's used as a metaphor, and give you Sri Shankara's definition here. Asambhutihi. What do you mean by asambhuti? Prakritihi, in one word. By asambhuti, that's long, he means prakriti. Now, prakriti you might know as nature, but here it's used in a Vedanta context. It's used as a technical term, nature. Doesn't mean nature exactly. It means that out of which nature emerged. That because of which, that from which the universe emerged is Prakriti. The cause for creation, the cause for all that exists is Prakriti. Here, Prakriti is then being used as a technical term, the cause for all that exists. Sri Shankara explains it very thoroughly. He says, asambhutihi, what do you mean by asambhuti? Prakritihi, what do you mean by that? Karanam, the cause. What kind of cause? Avidya, the cause in the form of ignorance. In some Vedanta contexts, Prakriti ends up being a little bit like the Vedanta concept of Maya, the cause for creation. That's why Shankara doesn't use the word Maya here. He uses the word avidya, ignorance. So he says, what do you mean by Prakriti? Karanam, the cause for everything. Avidya, the ignorance, which is the cause for everything. Avyakrita akhya, that which is unmanifest. And that's a very helpful word. The unmanifest stuff out of which the universe emerged. That is our Vedantic definition of Prakriti. Prakriti is, in Vedanta, Prakriti means the unmanifest stuff out of which the universe emerged. That's a nice definition. So that's our use of asambhuti here. So Prakriti, and then I'll just say the unmanifest. All right. So those who asambhutim upasate, those who resort to or worship this unmanifest stuff out of which the universe emerged, what happens to them? Andam tamaha pravishanti. They enter blinding darkness. And to finish the verse, tataha bhuyaha eva tamaha, even darker darkness. Tataha bhuya eva, more than that. Tamas, that darkness which is more than that. Te pravishanti, they enter. Who enters? Ye, those who sambhutyam rataha, those who are rataha, who revel in, who are committed to asambhuti. Asambhutyam sambhutyam means to sambhuti. Means they're committed to sambhuti, they're dedicated to it, committed to it. Now, what is sambhuti? We have this problem. Well, if asambhuti is unmanifest, then you can probably guess that sambhuti is something that is manifest. And these English words are very helpful because the Sanskrit words are not going to be so helpful. Already the word prakriti is a little confusing here in this context, but if you want to make it worse, Sri Shankara, in explaining what is asambhuti, he says asambhuti is, as we all know, how's this? Everyone knows that Sambhuti is Hiranyagarbha. Oh, of course. Yes, it's complicated, and this is the words Prakriti and Hiranyagarbha are technical terms used in Vedantic cosmology. Cosmology is a theory of how the universe comes into existence. And in Vedantic cosmology, you start with avyakta, unmanifest, which we're using the word prakriti for here. Actually, we're using the word asambhuti here, but this is the idea. And according to Vedantic cosmology, from the unmanifest, the first thing to emerge is not physical stuff, but subtle stuff, sukshma stuff, the subtle universe. The subtle universe emerges first. The gross or physical universe emerges later. Remember, our definition of sukshma or subtle is non-physical. And to make that very clear, the laws of nature are non-physical. Laws of nature are part of the sukshma jagat, the subtle world. We could say things like gravity and magnetism are part of the subtle world, part of the laws of nature. Suppose we consider all of the subtle stuff of the universe, all of the laws of nature, we consider them collectively. To collectively means samashti. The samashti sukshma the total collection of all that is subtle in the universe is called Hiranyagarbha. So Hiranyagarbha, when you get a bad translation, it's just lovely. I don't know how they can do this. Hiranyagarbha is used as this highly technical term, meaning the total subtle universe that emerges first from the unmanifest universe. And then they go and translate it very literally as the golden egg. What? To translate this highly technical term very literally as golden egg just means it's already confusing, and then they translate it as golden egg, and now you're completely lost. So Hiranyagarbha is a technical term. You cannot translate it with any one term. If you want to translate it at all, you can translate it as the total subtle stuff of the universe. So from the unmanifest emerges the subtle, and from the subtle emerges the physical. Virat. Virat. Hiranyagarbha is a name for the total subtle stuff. Virat is a technical term for the total physical stuff. This is Vedanta cosmology. It's not our subject matter here. Our subject matter is asambhuti and sambhuti. But in order to understand these obscure terms, we need to understand how they're being used. So, avyakta, let's summarize here. The text uses the term asambhuti, and it uses the term asambhuti to refer to prakriti, that which is unmanifest. And then the text uses the term sambhuti, which is manifest, and specifically then Hiranyagarbha, it means the manifestation of the subtle universe. All right. Yes, obscure, but this is Upanishad. This is not an ordinary text, and this is certainly not an introductory Vedanta class. Now that we have some definitions, we can return to verse 12 and paraphrase it. So those who worship asambhuti, those who worship not exactly nature, although there's no one word to translate it, those who worship that unmanifest stuff out of which the universe emerged. What happens to them? They go into blinding darkness. And there are others who manifest not the unmanifest, but the manifest. Hiranyagarbha, the total subtle stuff of the universe, which we could term as the powers of nature. It's not a bad translation. The universal powers of nature. Those who worship the universal powers of nature go to even deeper darkness. So, all of this appears to be an extension of this. So, this kind of meditation, actually not exactly. Let me retract what I just said. It's not going to be helpful. It's not actually going to be accurate. I'm looking for a connection to make things a little bit more clear. There's no connection here. What we're talking about, though, is another kind of meditation. Two kinds of meditation. So we've already discussed the limitations of Vedic rituals. We've discussed the limitations of meditation on the gods. Now we have two more kinds of meditation. That is meditation on asambhuti, meditation on the unmanifest, and then there's meditation on sambhuti, meditation on the laws of nature, the powers of nature. We'll translate it very loosely. That is verse 12, which is very much like verse 9. Now we can go to verse 13, which you'll see is very much like verse 10, which is why we can kind of go more quickly through the series of verses. So verse 13. Anyadevahu I'm sorry. I have to get this text. Anyadevahu sambhavat. Anyadevahu sambhavad. Anyadaha sambhavat. Anyadaha sambhavat. Iti shushumadhirahanam. Iti shushumadhirahanam. Yenas tadvichakshire. Yenas tadvichakshire. Looks familiar? Second line is exactly like verse 10. First line is similar to verse 10. Anyat eva ahuhu sambhavat. Ahuhu, they say, sambhavat, that which you get from meditating on sambhuti, that which you get from meditating on the powers of nature, we'll say. Anyat eva, that's different. You get one result from meditating on the powers of nature. Anyat eva ahuhu, and they say it's different. Asambhavat, what you get from meditating on asambhuti, what you get from meditating on prakriti, on the unmanifest from which the universe came forth. So different results. Meditating on the powers of nature, you get one result. Meditating on the unmanifest universe, you get a different result. Iti shushruma, thus we have heard, dhiranam, from the wise ones who came before, exactly like verse 10. Yea, those who, naha, unto us, tad vichachakshire, those who taught all of this to us. So different results for the two forms of meditation. And just like we saw before, if you get one result from Vedic rituals, another result from meditation on the gods, you might wonder, what results do you get from doing both? In the same way, if you get one result from meditating on the unmanifest, and another result from meditating on the manifest, the powers of nature, then you might wonder, what result do you get meditating on both? And that's what we see in verse 14, which is the final of that set of 3 verses. So, before we see that, wait 1 second. Yeah, I want to back up, if you will forgive me, just to explain in a little bit more detail if it's anyat, if you get one result from meditating on the unmanifest, and anyat, another result from meditating on the manifest, what are those results? And Sri Shankara, in his commentary, he says, for meditating on asambhuti, the unmanifest, he says, avyakrita upasanat, through meditation on avyakrita, on the unmanifest. Through meditation on the unmanifest, what do you get? Prakriti laya. You gain dissolution in prakriti. It's a form of samadhi. It's a form of samadhi where if you're meditating on the unmanifest and your mind becomes unmanifest. Prakriti laya. Meditating on the unmanifest, your mind becomes unmanifest. That Shankara calls that Prakriti laya, and that is the result of meditating on asambhuti, meditating on the unmanifest. Now, what about anyat? What about the other one? The other one, meditating on sambhuti, and he says, karya brahma upasanat, through meditating on karya brahma, Brahman as the cause for everything. And karya Brahman, Vedanta has this really complex cosmology. So karya Brahman is a synonym for Hiranyagarbha. And unless you read a lot of Vedanta, none of this will make any sense. So Shankara uses this term, karya Brahma, Brahman as an effect. Brahman made manifest. Hiranyagarbha is manifest, the manifest laws of nature. So karya Brahma upasanat, through meditation on Hiranyagarbha, through meditation on the powers of nature, we'll say, what do you get out of that? He makes it very clear. Animadyaihi aishwarya lakshanam. Whoa. Anima, etc. Aishwarya. Powers, lakshanam. Powers characterized. Aishwarya lakshanam. Powers characterized by anima, etc. Anima is one of 8 powers achieved through yogic meditations. Anima is the ability to make yourself tinier than an atom. Mahima is a power to make yourself bigger than the universe. And it goes on, there are 6 more powers. Powers of transforming yourself in apparently magical ways. We're not going to discuss whether such powers actually exist or not. I've never seen any evidence of it, nor have I heard any legitimate reference to it. They don't appear to exist, but we find plenty of references to these powers. Whether or not the powers exist is another thing independent of our discussion. For the sake of our discussion, we're talking about gaining these powers. How? Through meditation. Specifically through meditation on Hiranyagarbha, through meditation on the powers of nature. That would make sense. You meditate on the powers of nature, you get powers. You meditate on the unmanifest, your mind becomes unmanifest. Yet, these are very limited goals. Your mind becomes unmanifest in meditation. You're meditating on the unmanifest, your mind becomes unmanifest. While your mind is unmanifest, you experience total bliss, ananda. Wonderful. How long does your meditation end? How long does your meditation last? It lasts for half hour, 1 hour, 2 hours. 2 hours? Have you had a meditation last 2 hours? Some of you may have. But you get the idea that if you achieve this prakriti laya, this absorption in the manifest, and if you enjoy that bliss, it's only going to last for a while. And if you do the other form of meditation, meditating on the manifest, meditating on Hiranyagarbha, and you gain these powers. Imagine you could gain these powers. So you gain these powers. Are you any happier? Are you more content? Do you experience uninterrupted peace and contentment? Already you have a lot of power. Think about it. As human beings, we have incredible Shakti, incredible power and capacity. With the power, and compare yourself to an ant. What can an ant do compared to what you can do? So with all of this incredible power you're endowed with as a human being, are you able to manufacture complete contentment and perfect peace? So, if you could gain 8 more powers, like anima, like the power of being small, if you gain 8 more powers, in addition to all the Shakti that you already have, if you gain 8 more yogic powers, is it going to make that big a difference? That's the point. So these verses then are being critical of what can be accomplished through these meditations. Now we're ready to finish the sequence of 3 verses. With verse 14. So we posed a question a few moments ago. If the results of meditation on the unmanifest are limited, and the results of... Well, there's a funny joke coming here. Watch this. If the result of meditating on the unmanifest is limited, and the result of meditating on the manifest is limited, then you might think, what if I do both? Do 2 limited things add up to limitless? And the joke, this is a bad joke. Many of you have heard this one. It's like in marriage where you want to find your missing half. Because you're half and you want the other half. And then 2 halves equal a whole, right? That's our concept of marriage. 2 halves equal a whole. But when you look at many marriages, it doesn't seem to work like that. And it's because we've got the mathematics wrong. Marriage is not like addition, 1/2 plus 1/2. Marriage is more like multiplication. 1/2 times 1/2, giving you a quarter, not a whole. But that's a legitimate metaphor because one limited person clinging to another limited person is not going to create perfection, ever. Better that husband should be full and complete, wife should be full and complete, than 1 times 1 equals 1. Perfection. If husband is incomplete and wife is incomplete, the result is suffering. If husband is full and complete, wife is full and complete, the result is perfection. That's the mathematics here. So here in this context, if meditation on the unmanifest is incomplete and meditation on the manifest is incomplete, doing them both again is going to be incomplete, and that's the conclusion in the final verse here, verse 14. Sambhutim cha vinhasham cha, sambhutim cha vinhasham cha, Yastadvedo bhayagam saha. Yastadvedo bhayagam saha. Vinashena mrityum tirtva. Vinashena mrityum tirtva. Sambhuhu tyamritamashnuте. Sambhuhu tyamritamashnuте. If this text isn't confusing enough, the word asambhuti has here been replaced by vinasham. As if it's not confusing enough. What can we say? Vedic poetry. This is Rishi Vakya. These are the direct words of the rishis, and there's no rule. They're not confined by rules. So, sambhuti cha, vinasham cha. So, sambhuti means meditation on the laws of nature. Vinasham cha, meditation on the unmanifest. Yaha, one who, ubhayam saha, both of them together, tad veda, knows them both. One who knows both of these, one who practices them together. What is the result? Vinashena, through vinasha. Vinasha here means asambhuti. Asambhuti means prakriti. Prakriti means meditation on the unmanifest. That's what we're dealing with. Sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry. This is what it is. What can we do? This is Upanishad. So, vinashena, through meditation on the unmanifest, what do you get? Mrityum tirtva. Hey, we just heard that a few verses ago. Exactly. This is a parallel verse to verse 11. So, mrityum tirtva, you cross over death. What does that mean? Well, we saw before, you reach pitraloka, the heaven of the ancestors. And then, sambhutya, through meditation on the manifest, through meditation on the laws of the universe, amritam ashnute, exactly like we saw a few verses before. You gain amritam, immortality, but how did we understand immortality? You gain the same condition as the gods, you go to the same place as the gods, Devaloka, you get to enjoy yourself in Devaloka for a while. You can enjoy yourself in Pitraloka for a while, you can enjoy yourself in Devaloka for a while, but if going to heaven is the result of karma, karma includes, meditation is karma. Any action can be manasa karma. Mental action is karma. So if going to heaven is a result of karma, the karma is finite and limited. Therefore, the result is necessarily finite, limited. Therefore, the result of one or both of these forms of meditation is limited. Two limited forms of practice still give a limited result. And here we've concluded a series of 6 verses, all of which are critical of so-called spiritual practices. Notice, so-called. They are spiritual practices, but spiritual practices which aim fairly low. Spiritual practices, Vedic rituals, as we said, as a spiritual practice. What is the goal of these Vedic rituals? That the rains should continue to come and our crop should flourish. That we should have the birth of a male child. These are the results of spiritual practice in the form of Vedic rituals. And then we saw 3 different forms of meditation. All forms of meditation do not have the same goal in mind. The forms of meditation described in these verses are forms of meditation that concern gaining power or reaching heaven. Gaining some kind of yogic power or reaching some kind of heaven. These are all considered very limited goals. They're not considered, they are very limited goals, as compared with what is possible through the teachings of the ancient rishis, where you discover the perfection that you already are. This is the amazing irony of Vedanta. You already, in some sense, you already have that limitlessness that we seek. I mentioned before, my guru's language. You already are what you want to become. You already have what you want to possess. That limitlessness, that boundarylessness, that fullness, that completeness, and the teachings of the rishis make you discover that. But all of these other goals are far inferior. Many Vedic texts will make that same point. These other goals are far inferior. So here we've seen our Isha Upanishad dedicate this series of 6 verses to keeping us on the right track. Just because it seems spiritual, is it? And let me just conclude with a common observation. A very common, quote, spiritual practice is you go to the temple, you stand in front of, say, Lord Ganesha, and you pray, "Oh Ganesha, my boss is not giving me the promotion and raise I deserve. There's some problem, there's some obstacle. Please make that problem go away." Now, praying to Ganesha is actually praying to the God of the universe. So you're praying to the God of the universe over this really stupid little problem. What a limited goal. Then you go to the other altar, and Goddess Lakshmi is standing there. And you pray, "Oh Lakshmi, we really need some more money in our family, etc., etc. I have this financial problem and that, and all of this." And then you say your prayers, and then before you leave, you're sure to put $10 or $20 in that hundi, because that's your bakshish. You are paying off Bhagavan, buying God's blessings by putting that money in the hundi. Point is clear that in ancient times and in modern times, many times our spiritual practice aims low. It is spiritual practice, but it's an inferior spiritual practice. And this Upanishad makes it very clear. All of this, and look how much detail we've seen in these 6 verses, all of this is a very inferior form of spiritual practice. So what should you do? You should go back to the very first verse. Tena tyaktena punjita. Through complete renunciation, giving up all worldly concerns, this is how you will reach the highest goal. Not by setting your goal in the world, but by setting your goal, you're setting your aim not in the world, but setting your aim to transcend the world. This is the vision of the rishis. Okay, and that concludes this section of the Upanishad, and then we have the closing section of the Upanishad, which is even more obscure. But we'll try to make sense of it, starting in our next class. We'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.